commitment. You are at once a Lafayette, a Byron, a Norman Bethune, a Che Guevara, a Patrick Ogello, a martyr for Palestinian freedom. You are not dead. You live. You will live forever. You are the patron saint of Palestine and revolution. Leila. September 11 was a day for banter. It started with a visit from the envoy of Honduras, a corpulent, mustached feudal lord. Mr. Fuhrer introduced him as His Excellency, the Consul of Honduras. He asked, "How did you obtain this Honduran passport?" I answered contemptuously, "Did the Popular Front disguise you and send you here as a fictitious Banana Republic ambassador?" His Excellency was infuriated. He departed like a vanquished Napoleon. What a sad state of affairs for officialdom, for a Latin consul to be ridiculed and insulted by a Palestinian or a nobody hijacker. How humiliating. Mr. Fuhrer was appalled, but not surprised by my reaction. I blamed him for failing to fulfill his promise of knitting material. He apologized and explained, "You are not allowed to have sharp instruments in your possession." He wanted to know if the front would explode the plane with the passengers, as was reported by the objective British press that day. "Yes," I said unhesitatingly. "What?" he asked. "Have you no humanity?" "Humanity, my foot," I shouted. "You should be ashamed to utter such a word in the West. If you have any integrity, you remove the word from your dictionaries and declare it a non-English word." I started making a speech on Zionism and imperialism and how the British vampired the Arab world, but Mr. Fuhrer deflated me this time. He interrupted, "Miss Leila Khaled, perhaps our government is imperialist. Please stop your speech making." I felt undercut and later asked my bodyguards why Mr. Fuhrer didn't defend the government. They explained that there were many members of the Labour Party at Ealing who were not necessarily sympathetic to the Conservative government. On September 12th, I tried to take a different tact after hearing that the imperialist planes had been blown up. Since all kinds of strikes were going on in Britain, I thought my bodyguards should go on strike in sympathy with their fellow workers. I suggested since they were my prisoners, they should stage a revolt and join their fellow workers on strike. As I was urging them to rebel, Mr. Fuhrer walked in. He took a deep breath and said, "What are you up to now?" "Mr. Fuhrer," I said, "these prisoners deserve to be free." "What prisoners?" he inquired. "Those poor masters working night and day here." "Okay, you win this time," he said paternally. As Mr. Fuhrer sat checking his files, I decided to badger him. "I know the Home Office is violating British justice, habeas corpus, and other concepts of justice. But does the Ealing Hilton have to violate the laws of hygiene too, Mr. Fuhrer?" He scratched his head and inquired further. I informed him that I hadn't had a bath in 6 days. He quickly arranged for me to be marched to the fifth floor, accompanied by 4 police matrons, who insisted on having me undressed in their presence, as each guarded a corner of the narrow shower room. September 13th was a bad day for me. I felt ill most of the day and couldn't sleep that night. The doctor was called in. He pleaded with me to eat more than just a cheese sandwich and coffee and gave me 2 sleeping tablets. They had a terrible effect on me. That night was a nightmare for everybody except me. They thought I was about to die, but I surprised them and woke up feeling as if my head weighed a ton. When I opened my eyes at 5:30 a.m., everyone was practically in tears. That charming little matron was truly relieved and delighted to see me revive. It was apparent that she had had a sleepless night, as had most people around me. The next 2 weeks, I settled into an established routine. There were no further interrogations. I was allowed to use the matron's room and to roam within a 10-yard radius without being followed. Political issues in Jordan, especially after the 17th, preoccupied me and became the focal point of my discussions with Fuhrer and others. I was given a bundle of letters that had arrived at Ealing. Some denounced me, others supported the cause. One contained a marriage proposal. I was not permitted to answer any of them, but I was permitted to write to my parents and some close friends. I volunteered to translate the contents, but Mr. Fuhrer told me that Her Majesty's government had its own interpreters. It didn't surprise me that a full-scale massacre was underway in Jordan. Isolated in a British cage, however, I did not appreciate the magnitude and extent of Hussein's terror. It seemed, judging from reports in the British press, that the incident was a continuation of the policy of harassment, intimidation, and terror instituted in November of 1968 and continued sporadically since then. Although it was obvious that the latest combat engulfed the whole country, it was not so obvious as the final liquidation attempt on the part of the monarchy. Many have alleged, without justification, that the PFLP precipitated the massacres by the Jordanian regime of September 1970 with multiple hijackings we undertook. Such a simple explanation of the well-conceived plot on the part of Jordanian authorities to eliminate the Palestinian Revolution cannot be accepted. The massacre of September and the subsequent mopping up operations took place while the Arab states fulminated should convince everyone that, indeed, the Arab kings and colonels regarded the Palestinian resistance as a dangerous movement that could threaten their very regimes and engulf the whole region in an international civil war of the working class versus the forces of oppression. One thing was made clear during those momentous months. Hussein was prepared to invite Israel to take over his kingdom rather than allow the resistance to topple him, and America almost intervened to quote-unquote rescue its citizens and maintain Hussein in power. The components in the drama were a power-hungry Hashemite ruling clique prepared to commit any treachery to keep the reins of power in its hands. General Arab silence, which can only be interpreted as acquiescence to the massacre, and the American Zionist conspiracy hatched between Golda Meir and Nixon in Washington. On September 17th, the British Guards, whether on their own initiative or under instructions from their superiors, urged me to ask for political asylum. To me, it was a repugnant form of abdication. I rejected the idea immediately. In fact, I demanded that I be released so that I could go and join my comrades in Jordan. The British bided their time and negotiated as partners of the so-called Burn Five, under pressure from the Americans and the Israelis. I am certain the Germans, the Swiss, and the British would have exchanged hostages for our prisoners had it not been for Zionist and American insistence on a unified front, an action which in effort showed how little the Europeans cared for their own citizens compared with those of the Zionist Israel and the American behemoth. I know that their justification for such callous deeds was that they were upholding international law and morality and defending innocent passengers, but let's not deceive ourselves. The interests of Dick, Nixon, and Golda Meir were placed ahead of those of Britain, Germany, and neutral quote-unquote Switzerland. The turmoil in Jordan disturbed me deeply. I tried to maintain my composure and act naturally, but it was a difficult job. Mr. Few was a daily visitor. He wondered why Muslims fought each other instead of the enemy. I lectured him on the nature of class society and explained that the good little British manufactured king of Jordan was part of the enemy camp. Few listened intently, but like most of his Western compatriots, he was unable to grasp the idea of social class and its historic implications. He only accused me of being bitter. I said I was more than bitter. I was full of class hatred and inspired for nothing less than the complete obliteration of the Jordanian monarchy and tenure. Pierre's perception of the remedy of my class consciousness was a week's stay in democratic Britain after my release. I said, I'll be happy to stay in Britain until Christmas if I were released immediately so as to enjoy the fruits of British democracy. Fear detected my sarcastic tone. Fear detected my sarcastic tone. Now, he said, I wish you would go back to Jordan before I lose my wife. Tell your wife not to worry, Mr. Few. I have no intention of marrying a fatherly British cop. If I do marry, it will be an Arab revolutionary or a simple peasant, not a British lord, not a Greek shipping magnate, not an American industrial baron. Is that clear, Mr. Few? I followed the Jordanian civil war in British press. When I began reading reports about the Syrian intervention, I deduced from fragmented editorial comments that an Israeli-U.S. invasion was being contemplated. When, however, it was reported that the Syrian column had been defeated by brave Jordanians and forced to withdraw, I realized that the regime was not on the verge of dethronement. But when I saw Hussein and Arafat shake hands in the presence of kings and presidents, I knew the revolution was betrayed. At that moment, I'm sure I could have unhesitatingly gunned down every participant in that conference. I could no longer withhold my fury. I could see the writing on the wall. The resistance was dead as a historic force. I truly cried for the blood of martyrs in Jordan, the blood bartered away at the Cairo Hilton, the Q Palace, and the Arab League headquarters. I cannot forgive the Arab League for the blood of Patrick, whose body still lay in the British morgue while counter-revolutionary peace was signed. I knew the fighters would repudiate the leadership and, in time, form their own revolutionary vanguard party. I knew it had to be done. I knew the front was going to do it, and in the ensuing months, however, Arafat and still prepared to negotiate with Jordan and embrace Hussein and Hassan. Early on September 28th, it was reported that President Nasir was dying. The news didn't strike me as real, nor did I fathom the implication of his impending death. I was still too frenzied over the Arafat-Hussein Accord to think clearly. Late on in the day, however, it was reported that President Nasir had died. I was stunned, emotionally paralyzed. The feelings I had when Che and Ho died returned, this time perhaps more poignantly, for I was, as every Arab was at one time or other, an admirer of Nasir. He was one of the greatest Arab leaders of the modern era. As a giant among dwarfs, he symbolized everything noble, great, and weak among the Arabs. He was from us and one of us. He was a leader of men. I felt a part of me died with him. I was happy I had lived in the age of Nasir. I will only be happier to live in a liberated Palestine. Grab some water. Mr. Few and those around me saw how sad I was. They couldn't understand why I should be so distressed over the death of someone I had denounced the day before. They couldn't understand that Nasir was the first champion of anti-imperialism in my world. On September 29th, Fuhrer intimidated that I might soon be released. I checked the newspapers closely for clues as to when the last 6 hostages were going to be surrendered to the International Red Cross Committee. They finally were on the 13th of September 1970. The moment the hostages reached Cyprus, I was instructed to prepare for departure. There was no indication of my destination. I bade my British friends farewell, kisses and all, and promised to send more customers to the Ealing Hilton, where clients have bodyguards and accommodation is free. At 6:30, Mr. Few came and asked me to which country I would like to go. I said confidently, the decision has already been made by my commanders. By the way, where am I being taken? Few didn't answer, and no one answered the question in the next few hours. I was told that since I was a soldier, I was expected to abide by the rules as I was being moved out of Britain. I agreed and followed orders to the letter. The matrons told me that people were lining up in the streets to see me, but they were going to be sadly disappointed as I would be taken out lying covered up in a van. I was surprised to be accompanied by a whole convoy of police cars and motorcycles. I was allowed one quick look at the crowd assembled around Ealing Police Station before being taken to a military airport. As I boarded the helicopter, I flashed a victory sign to the photographers. I said goodbye to Mr. Few and promised to visit the Ealing again. No, he cried out. Come to Britain, not to the Ealing. We traveled by helicopter for about an hour and then landed at another nameless airport. I noted to the captain that helicopters are more difficult to hijack than regular planes. He didn't appreciate my sense of humor. Then we boarded a Comet for an unannounced destination. I still couldn't find out where I was going. Then I heard a member of the crew saying, there is another woman to come. I knew instantly it had to be Amina Dabar, who was being held by the Swiss in Zurich. Suddenly we ascended in Munich. The airport was a garrison. From my window I counted the armored cars. I was ordered to take the last seat on the plane. 3 brothers from the action organization, Mufid Abdul Rahman, Hanabi, and Nasat, were brought aboard. I knew none of them, and we were not allowed to shake hands. Next stop was Zurich, where my inspiration, Amina and comrades Ibrahim Tefik and Muhammad Abu al-Hafa came aboard. I wanted at least to hug Amina, but it was not permitted. We just greeted each other from afar. Each of the passengers had his own bodyguard. None was handcuffed. The night of September 30th was a long one. The journey to Cairo was the longest I ever endured. I slept periodically. We had to remain seated at all times. We arrived in Cairo October 1st, 1970 at 8 a.m. The city was in mourning for the death of President Nasir. The British, German, and Swiss consuls met us at the airport. Each one of us was dutifully taken in hand by his consul and turned over to the Egyptian authorities. Protocol reigned. I was astonished to find out that Patrick's body wasn't with us, but there were no British around to denounce or Arab leaders to threaten. We were taken to an Egyptian guest house and held there for 11 days. We were told that we were being held there for security reasons. On October 12th, we were flown to Damascus and each commando rejoined his or her unit. Before returning to Beirut, however, I visited my friend, Colonel Ali Zaza, the man who had accused me of working for Egyptian intelligence in the TWA affair. Colonel, I said as I barged into his office, I trust you are convinced now that the Popular Front and I are nobody's tools. I am, he said. Wouldn't you like to keep me in your guest house again? No, Leila. This time you can be my guest for lunch. No, thank you, Colonel, I said. I have to report back to my unit in Beirut within 2 hours. See you on the battlefield in Palestine. I went to Beirut in mid-October and held a press conference at al-Haddad's office, pointing out that Patrick was murdered by the Israelis and that the British excused the crime that took place in their airspace. To this day, the British have refused to put their evidence before a competent authority for inspection, and the autopsy report remains confidential. For the next few weeks, I spent most of my time giving press interviews and preparing to marry a fellow fighter, Basim, an Iraqi Arab revolutionary. We got married on November 26, 1970, spent a week together, and then returned to our separate tasks. This is part 3, the conclusion. This is part 3, the conclusion, and this is saying section 8, called The Fascist Tide and the Arab Revolution. Against me, he is a lion. Against the enemy, he is an ostrich. The Jordanian soldiers carry themselves like lions when it is a question of the unarmed Palestinian refugees, but when the time came, they did not know how to die in defense of Jerusalem. That's President Hariri. I'm going to butcher that name, so I'm just going to tell y'all to refer to the page of the Republic of Algeria. The supreme objective of the Palestinian liberation movement is the total liberation of Palestine, the dismantlement of the Zionist state apparatus, and the construction of a socialist society in which both Arabs and Jews can live in peace and harmony. To achieve our objective, we have adopted the strategy of people's war and protracted armed struggle. We have no other alternative. We see no other possible option to dislodge the Zionists from Palestine. Our struggle will be long and arduous because the enemy is powerful, well organized, and well sustained from abroad. We shall win because we represent the wave of the future, because we are the immense majority of the oppressed, because mankind is on our side, and above all, because we are determined to achieve victory. The goal of the Arab states is the elimination of the consequences of aggression or the restoration of the status quo, not the liberation of the whole Palestine. The Arab states contend that they can force Israel to withdraw to the June 4, 1967 borders by a judicious combination of diplomacy and conventional war, not by armed struggle and revolutionary ideology. They stress that the political solution and accept mediation by the UN and the major powers as a fait accompli. I don't know how to say that. They tried to persuade their American and Soviet friends to pressure Israel to withdraw. They also periodically engage in spasmodic military actions to demonstrate their determination to regain the occupied territories. Israel still holds every inch of territory it conquered in 1967, and in all likelihood it will continue to do so, barring profound changes in Arab and American policies. To secure the home front, the Arab governments have strengthened and modernized their intelligence services. Both progressives and conservatives are collaborating effectively to stem the tide of revolution at home. The aim of America is regional stability, quote unquote, under its ascendant power. In this age of neocolonialism, America has its storming gendarme, I don't know how to say that, in Israel and is militia in the reactionary and military cliques of the Arab world. If its calculations go awry, however, America wouldn't find it difficult to intervene directly to protect its quote-unquote citizens and interests, or to help a local potentate ward of the menace of communism. America is firmly entrenched in the world of black gold. It has no intention of ever sacrificing the flow of bullion into the banks. Indeed, it is prepared to risk nuclear war to keep us, quote unquote, free and safe for democracy. America doesn't love the naked furics of the Arab world, nor does it care for every little forgotten Jew the world over. America cares for America. And America is Wall Street, the Pentagon, their agents and manipulators in the government bureaucracy, and the hordes of priests, journalists, professors which populate the churches, the media, and the universities. The aim of the Soviet Union is the neutralization of the U.S. and its eventual expulsion from the Middle East. As an advocate of coexistence, the peaceful transition to socialism, and the non-capitalist road to development, the USSR supports the Arab national regimes in their anti-imperialist struggle, provides them with loans for industrial projects, and weapons to fight the Israeli conquerors. As a sponsor of the political solution, the Soviet Union recognizes the legitimacy of Israel, respects its sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states, that demands the impartial implementation of UN resolutions. The Soviet Union is a companion of peace and coexistence, not of people's war and revolutionary violence. With the quote-unquote progressive Arab regimes, the Soviet government stands for the domestication, not the elimination of the resistance and the Arab revolution. America, Israel, and Arab reactionaries stand, on the other hand, for the liquidation of the resistance and the liberation of the Arab revolution. The overriding objective of Israel is the peace of the bayonet, the peace of conquest, the dictated and imposed peace of the defense force of Dayan, the peace of North American and West European rabbis and their congregations. Briefly, the peace of America, Israel, and Zionism is the peace of total destruction of the Palestinian people, the domination of neighboring states, and the perpetuation of Zionist supremacy in the Middle East. Since Israel cannot rely forever on the generosity of the world Jewry, the blank check at the Export-Import Bank of America, or expect a new kind of German reparations, it needs new guarantees to achieve and maintain a self-sustaining and viable economy. It needs a continuing influx of immigrants and dollars, and it needs a peace with tension to obtain the support and concern of friends and allies. Therefore, Israel favors the present conditions of unchallenged dominance in the absence of a more durable contractual peace. However, Israel would be prepared to sign a peace treaty, in quotes, forego the possibility of further territorial conquest and withdraw to the June 4th borders, with the exception of Jerusalem, under two conditions. A, access to Arab markets, and B, ownership of the oil and the mineral resources of the Gulf of Suez. Nothing less will induce Israel to withdraw or make serious territorial concessions other than total defeat or American decisive pressure. The latter two possibilities are out of the question because the Arab armies are incapable of waging the kind of war required, and if they were, both the Soviet Union and the U.S. would not permit them to undertake it. Secondly, the U.S. has not exerted enough pressure to force Israel to withdraw. Indeed, if anything, the U.S. has implicitly endorsed the territorial conquest of Zionism by the continuous sale of Phantoms and Skyhawks and the outflow of millions of American taxpayer dollars. Thus, the state of neither war nor peace will continue until the foreseeable future, whatever ad hoc settlement may be attained under UN or great powers' auspices. In spite of the apparent differences among the U.S., the Soviet Union, the Arab states, and Israel, a convergence of interests in the spring and summer of 1970 enabled them to coalesce either overtly or covertly. The implicit accord they reached manifested itself in what was termed the Rogers Peace proposals, proposals which entailed a ceasefire agreement between the Arab states and Israel, and acceptance or significance of the accord. And Israel and acceptance of the UN resolutions concerning peace and security in the Middle East. The full significance of the accord was revealed in September 1970, when King Hussein proceeded to eliminate the resistance in the southern Jordan as his part of the agreement in Rogers Peace. In mid-August, Hussein's target was Irbid, a city in the north where refugee and resistant camps were mercilessly attacked, people killed, and bodies mutilated. The talk of forthcoming Armageddon was in the air. Everything foreboded ill for the resistance, unless it seized the initiative and decided to settle who ruled in Jordan. Skirmishing continued in Amman, Juresh, Zerga, and Irbid. Hussein was in hot pursuit of the resistance. Daily he tested its will to fight. The resistance was preoccupied with its own preeminence and power. It expressed its fearlessness in bombastic declarations, but agreed upon no contingency plans. Very few anticipated the massive barbarity and bestiality of Hussein and co. Indeed, the resistance leadership thought it would muddle through the gathering storm and perhaps emerge unscathed and possibly even strengthened by Hussein's direct assault. Fatah's right-wing leadership and other sectors of the movement cannot conceive that Hussein was out to decapitate and annihilate the resistance. During this period of internal dismay, disarray, and disintegration, I was on my way to Europe to carry out a minor aspect of the front's offensive strategy to topple Hussein. But he and his CIA advisors preempted us on September 1st, 1970. He put his well-established, well-known plan into effect. He disclosed an assassination plot and attributed it to the Popular Front, hoping to split the ranks of the resistance and pit the fighters against each other. The Western and Arab press dutifully reported Hussein's charges and distinguished between honest revolutionaries who wanted to fight Israel and terrorists who were trying to precipitate a civil war in Jordan. The plot unfolded rapidly as Hussein scornfully told Iraq not to meddle in Jordanian internal affairs and appealed to the great powers, including the Soviet Union, to restrain the hotheads, all the while drawing their attention to Iraq's threatened intervention if Hussein did not stop firing on the guerrillas. The Arab attention to Iraq's threatened intervention if Hussein did not stop. The Arab League Council was called into an emergency session. It appealed for an immediate cessation of hostilities, September 5th and 6th, and reactivated the Four-Nation Committee, established as a result of the June fighting to oversee the implementation of the July 10th accord between Hussein and the resistance. Meanwhile, the Palestinian National Congress failed to come to grips with the issue. It merely conducted another session of poetic oratory and no binding decisions. The resistance was hemmed in. The leadership still refused to act in concert. Then came the epoch-making strategy of the Popular Front. All the enemies of the revolution were outflanked on September 6, 1970. Hussein's authority was immediately shattered. Israel's European and American allies were put on the defensive. The Palestinian and Arab people rejoiced and applauded our deed. The world stood shocked and forced to take heed of Palestine. Palestine was on the lips of everyone the world over for a week. Our Six-Day War began. For the first time in modern history, the Palestinians were on the center stage, and we were directing the play. We tasted the meaning of sovereignty. We reaped the fruit of the summer of harvest. We gloried in the joy of nationhood. We became a people for a whole week. But nobody congratulated us openly. All condemned us universally. But we were oblivious to the reactions of the intensive world whose tender conscience did not have room for the Palestinians, a world that had built a shrine to Zion and couldn't afford a plaque for Palestine. Our Zionist prosecutors had a niche in the Western pantheon. We were a past memory for archaeologists to explore. The world sat in judgment on a subject it recognized as a refugee. The refugee said no to charity, no to pity, no to benevolent despotism, no, but yes to Palestine, to liberation, to revolution. The seas of British and Swiss American planes turned things topsy-turvy for the enemy. It was no longer able to dictate peace terms. What it is startling, however, is the Western proponent of humanity and peace resorted to the threat and use of violence in order to safeguard their sovereign rights. They initially pressured Hussein into carrying out their will, which he did in an 11-day war of annihilation against the resistance. Here is the testimony of Arnaud de Brochgrave of Newsweek, October 5, 1970, page 38. In almost a quarter of a century of foreign reporting, I cannot recall anything remotely similar to what I have seen in Jordan. I have witnessed tribal massacres in Africa and the slow, steady bloodletting in Vietnam. But there has been nothing like the urban devastation both of life and property that Amman has suffered. When Hussein appeared to be failing at the beginning of the onslaught, he, with his Israeli and American allies, concocted the Syrian intervention myth in order to facilitate the planned intervention of both America and Israel and Jordan. The evidence for the myth, of course, was the Palestine Liberation Army's forward thrust from Syria. Forward thrust. Sorry, I lost my place. Admittedly, hold on. The evidence for both. Myth, of course, Palestine Liberation Front, for which annihilated the brigade, Hussein's pride. Admittedly, Syria did not hamper the PLA effort, and it probably approved of it and supported it. But the PLA's foray into Jordan provided the U.S. and Israel with the pretext to threaten intervention of their own unless Syrian forces withdrew. The whole plot must have been well thought out when Golda Meir arrived unexpectedly in Washington on the 17th. The same day that Hussein planned to pulverize the resistance. Mr. Meir was closeted with Nixon and both amicably agreed to continue their discussions in the light of developments in Jordan. Hold on, let me grab some water. On September 18th, the Chicago Sun-Times reported on a long private meeting its editorial board had with Nixon the night before. The report said that America was prepared to intervene directly should Syria and Iraq enter the conflict and tip the military balance against the government forces loyal to King Hussein. The cat was out of the bag. 2 days before the alleged Syrian intervention was supposed to have taken place, Meir and Nixon decided to intervene, therefore to give credence to the myth of Syrian intervention. Secretary of State William Rogers pointedly asked the Soviet Union September 20th to urge Syria to pull back and issued a statement which read in part, "We have been informed that tank forces have invaded Jordan from Syria during the night and have moved toward Ramtha. We have also been informed that Jordanian armor is resisting this invasion. We condemn this irresponsible and imprudent intervention of Syria into Jordan. This action carries with it the danger of broadened conflict. We call upon Syrian government to end immediately this intervention in Jordan, and we urge all other concerned governments to impress upon the government of Syria the necessity of withdrawing the forces which have invaded Jordan." Rogers, the underrated and soft-spoken arch imperialist, was of the opinion that Syria had no right to intervene in Jordan, but that he and Abba Ibn had the right to do so, at the request of the established authority of King Hussein. Anyhow, whatever Mr. Rogers had to say was merely the tip of the iceberg of America's planned Operation Brash Strike, which was intended to restore Hussein to his throne had he fallen or had he been on the verge of falling. According to the Times Post News Service, September 2nd, the 82nd Airborne Division began moving into full alert at Fort Bragg on September 20th. On orders from President Nixon, the signal directed the 14,000 paratroops here to get ready for possible use in Jordan. Their mission, if so ordered, to descend on on Amman and rescue 54 air hijacked hostages, including 38 Americans and some 400 other Americans living in the guerrilla-besieged Jordan capital. Simultaneously alerted were about 2,000 troops in U.S. Army units in West Germany, ships of the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean, and 1,500 U.S. Marines aboard assault ships headed for the embattled area. The implication was that while the 82nd would concentrate on a lightning-quick in-and-out rescue, the others might be sent in if King Hussein's army could not hold off the Palestinian guerrillas and Syrian and Iraqi forces supporting them. In America's open society and free press, the Times Post-Dispatch summarized the plans thus. The 200-plus man initial ready force could go to an intermediate stop by refueling, maybe the Azro, Spain, West Germany, or some other reasonable site, and then swoop down aboard their 500-mile-per-hour, 5,000-mile range G-141s on Amman's international airport. If possible, they could land the planes. If the airport was insecure, the force could parachute down, equipment and all, and capture the field. With the field secure and more increments arriving, not only men and guns, but helicopters carried inside big transports, the assault force could be ready to move out within hours. Helicopters could be prepared for flight. Then they could attack specified areas where the people to be rescued were, and in classic Vietnam tactics, hold off attackers with their heavy firepower while disgorging men who would then fan out to build a perimeter defense. Amman's few open spaces, like parks, were marked off as landing zones. For such intelligent and heroic deeds, those are in quotes, America was relying on Israeli intelligence, the speed and firepower of its armory, and the quote-unquote love of the Jordanian people for Richard Nixon, Spiro Agnew, Moshe Dayan, and Golda Meir. Moreover, America's planned action to maintain Hussein in power was disclosed by the New York Times, October 8, 1970, on page 1, in a story that also implicated the Soviet Union and the Arab states. Here is a summary report of that in-depth article. Washington. The United States and Israel were preparing to take coordinated military action in the recent Jordanian crisis, according to U.S. and Israeli sources. This plan envisioned an Israeli attack on the Syrian tank forces that had entered Jordan if it appeared that King Hussein's army was incapable of stopping them. In this event, the United States would have used the Sixth Fleet and other units to safeguard Israel's rear and flanks from Egyptian or Soviet attacks from the Suez Canal area. The plan was not put into effect because the Syrian tanks, harassed by King Hussein's jets and armor, began retreating into Syria. Informed sources here believe that it was the combination of Israeli troops buildup plus the U.S. military alert, both well publicized, that sobered the Syrians and the Soviet Union. President Nixon assumed personal direction of the intense diplomatic and military activity as the crisis approached its climax. The bond between the U.S. and Israel in this crisis was their joint determination that King Hussein must not be overthrown by outside intervention, because they assumed he would be replaced by a regime closely linked to Moscow. An urgent message from King Hussein, asking the United States and Britain to consider the military support they could provide him, gave impetus to the planning. But perhaps an equally strong force for quick action was the feeling in Washington that Israel will consider itself compelled to strike the Syrian forces if they continue to penetrate into Jordan in support of the guerrillas who were challenging King Hussein's authority. Another more publicized factor was concern about 400 U.S. citizens and 54 hostages, including 38 Americans, in the hands of Palestinian guerrillas in Jordan at the time. As if Hussein has not been sufficiently exposed as an imperialist Zionist agent, Time magazine came out with a full-page account, November 23, 1970, page 34, describing his relations with Israel since 1968 and reporting that the 10th meeting had just been held in the Arva wilderness north of Eilat between Hussein and Yigal Allon, Israel's deputy prime minister. In an atmosphere of amability, Hussein, according to Time, informed Allon in a 90-minute dialogue that his throne was secure. But the time was not right for unilateral discussions. The Time report concerning the crux of the matter and its imperative comment was as follows. Even so, one result of the border meeting is the broader negotiations with representatives of other Arab states can be expected to follow. Turning to the question of the guerrillas, the two leaders agreed that the Fa'adin were a nuisance to both countries and the coordination was necessary to neutralize them. The king received promises of Israeli help. Hussein and Alan also agreed to expand economic relations. At the same time, however, Hussein protested that Miss Mir was undercutting him by observing during her latest U.S. visit that Palestinian statehood was only a question of redrawing Jordan boundaries. The king was prepared to grant Palestinian autonomy of a sort, he said, but under his rule and not as the nucleus of an independent Palestinian state. The civil war in Jordan was not an incidental phenomenon. It was part of America's global strategy to reverse the tide of history and to eliminate liberation movements everywhere. It was part of a war of reaction and suppression whose victims have been, in the main, the leaders and movements of the Third World since the Second World War. Since most resistance movements have either been defeated, undermined, or contained, with the exception of the Vietnamese nationalists, it was imperative that the voices of revolution be stilled, or at least weakened in Palestine. Thus came the June War of 1967 that was intended as the grand finale in America's attempt to restore sanctity and order, in quotes, in the world and rid mankind of the contagious virus of liberty and revolution. The attempt failed temporarily, but in 1970 to 71, the fascist tide once again flooded the Arab world. The consequences are not difficult to discern and evaluate. The immediate victim in the all-encompassing war of fascism was the resistance whose power, prestige, and effectiveness were eroded by the retreat of Fatah right-wing's leadership. They walked sheepishly to Hussein's slaughterhouse with the convenience of Arab regimes. And when the final assault came in July 1971, another fruitless Arab summit meeting was convened. Hussein imprisoned 2,300 guerrillas and drove the rest of the movement completely out of the Ajul Jarash area. No strongholds were left for the movement. Its former headquarters offices were in ruins in Amman and elsewhere in Jordan. Phase 1 of the revolution, revolutionism without ideology, was dead. As America extended its influence and spread its wings of annihilation anew in the Middle East, the comrades in arms of President Nasir, the Soviet wing of Ali Sabrari, and Sami Saraf were charged with high treason, May 13, 1971, and moved from their strategic positions in the Egyptian state apparatus and the Arab Socialist Union. President Sadat and his quote-unquote brilliant mentor Mohammed Hosseini Hayekal moved closer to Washington and slowly detached themselves from the Soviet Union in order to redress the balance in favor of non-alignment and go to reinstate the middle classes into Egypt society and improve its relations with the West. The ceasefire continued. No actions on the Suez front took place as the re-Egyptianization of Arab Egypt commenced in earnest in the aftermath of the upheaval. In less than 2 months after the Egyptian bombshell, Hussein intensified his incessant attacks on the guerrillas, to the eternal shame of the Arab world. About 100 Palestinian guerrillas took refuge in occupied Palestine and placed their fates in the hands of Dayan rather than die at the hands of King Hussein. The king proudly stated on July 18th, "We had no choice but to act against the commandos because they became a nuisance to many people and to the armed forces. The fighting is finished. This is final. Now there is no problem and attempts to be made to bring them together and achieve a better solution. If need be, we are all Fahadin against the Israelis." Asked if there was any new agreements with the guerrillas, Hussein stated, the time has gone when there were any new arrangements with the guerrillas. The time has gone when the commandos could act according to their whim. The time has come for the state to determine the areas where they must stay. They must also respond to the state's instructions. In other words, Hussein wanted a guerrilla movement to serve his and America's private interests and to help him recover his lost territory and keep the Palestinians in check. While Hussein's treachery was going on, a spark of hope appeared in the skies of the Arab homeland. In July 1971, the Hashem Atta movement seized power in the Sudan and proclaimed the first Arab Workers' Republic. By July 22nd, Sadat and Gaddafi had bared their teeth and heroically abolished the republic. Heroically is in quotes. They restored Numeri to power and instigated a communist witch hunt throughout the Arab world. They restored, they camouflaged their deeds and create diversion for the masses. Sadat, Gaddafi, and Assad formed the Federation of Arab Republics on September 1st, allegedly as a first step to Arab unity, in quotes, but in fact, as a means of safeguarding their regimes from revolution. Thus, the present Arab ruling cliques returned to positions held by their predecessors on the eve of 1948. Islamic fundamentalism, class collaboration, anti-communism. It would seem that the Arab ruling classes would rather embrace Zionism, live under the yoke of American imperialism, and retard the historic evolution of their societies, than submit to the will of the masses, abdicate power, or let other forces of progress lead the revolution. The petit bourgeois of the Arab world has become a spent historic force. It is incapable of coping with such crucial issues as oil, Israel, and poverty. His approach was revealed in Sadat's speech on July 23, 1971, the 19th anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution. He singled out the Popular Front for attack and contempt, declared war on Israel 5 times and withdrew 25 times, and applauded King Faisal for his moderation and statesmanship. No reference was made to the abolition of poverty, the struggle against imperialism, or the liberation of Palestine. Sadat's historic speech made it clear that the principal contradiction was not imperialism but the revolution. He, therefore, formed a new axis with Faisal and decided to become the new arbiter of Palestinian and Arab fortunes. Both are now trying to arrange for a approachment between the honest resistant groups and Hussein, and they have persuaded the executive committee of the PLO to go along, with the exception of the Popular Front. In October 1971, the resistance negotiated with Hussein in Jeddah and under Faisal's auspices. The Popular Front, in conformity with the will of the fighters, disclosed that the executive committee had agreed to conciliation, September 8, 1971, and denounced the so-called mediation attempts of the personal representative of Faisal and Sadat. With this exposure ends the story of Arabs in action and reaction with regard to 23 years of Palestinian diaspora. But there is a ray of hope on the horizon. The people no longer believe their leaders. The underground forces are multiplying in number, and the Popular Front is deepening its roots. It is still the hope for the future of the Palestinian people. And it says, since this book was completed, Leila Khaled has been doing mass political work, organizing the guerrilla camps and contriving to recruit supporters. She and I work closely together in the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now that Leila is known throughout the world, her picture having appeared in every Western newspaper, we are not likely to permit her in the foreseeable future to participate in foreign political or military missions. Her role is now to work inside the Arab world for the day when our people can once again return to their homeland. That's George Hajar, February 1973. And that's the end of the reading of this book. And I mean, to do just a quick recap, there was so much to learn from the autobiography of Leila Khaled, how she pointed out the class contradictions and how the petit bourgeois of the Arab world have collaborated many a times, and she gave examples with American imperialism and the Zionist settlers to sell out the Palestinians and to quash revolution. And then you also have people like King Hassim who would say, oh, we're for Palestinian liberation, but on his terms. He wanted to use the guerrilla fighters to expand his ambitions while also still colluding and capitulating to the West. These are important things to learn because the way in which we're presented like revolution and these upheaval events is that it's just this straight line, this linear process that happens that you fight, you win, or you lose, and then that's it. And that all sides are clear. When in actuality, there are so many moving parts that education then becomes so imperative, and access to information between liberation groups is also important. And we learn why. Because again, as we look at how media was used in this autobiography that later pointed out to us, that they were told that anytime they did anything on behalf of the resistance, on behalf of revolution, immediately America's media would go into overtime calling them terrorists. What's interesting too, that I would point out that we also see being implemented today, is that they also, when they saw that they were losing, popular support as far as the imperialist goes, they took another strategy. And the strategy was to draw a distinction between the good revolutionaries and the terrorist revolutionaries. Again, who decides who's the terrorist? Of course, it's the imperialists and the Zionists. And what is a terrorist? Those that threaten their power and serve for a free and liberated Palestine. And we see that juxtaposition all the time when the media or anyone tends to like put light on what's happening, whether it's a resistance here in the Imperial Court or in the Global South. They'll say, oh no, don't protest like that. Don't resist in that way. And the ones that will engage in quote unquote diplomacy, which is just sitting at the table and begging for your own humanity and your own self-determination from people who will not give it to you because it does not serve their interest to give it to you. They call that diplomacy. They call that the right way because they know that just goes into years and decades of bureaucratic barricades to where they'll just have you in a circle thinking that you can work within a system when that system is not intent to work for you, but only for the imperialist machine. I love that she pointed that out and did so very well, which is why I encourage those to go back and read it or listen to, whichever best way you retain information. Because again, they made it adamant that look, just because a person is Arab does not mean they're for a liberated Palestine. And that is an important distinction because even within Black revolution that we see happening globally, we understand we will see Black faces in high places that will betray the liberation of the people and that will side with the imperialists over and over again if it serves their best interest. We have to be able to maneuver and identify those things, in my opinion. We see a lot of times that, again, we have to have a class analysis when we approach this because we'll see the celebrity class or the business class do something like create a program and say it's financial literacy. And we will automatically say that's Black excellence or that's good. When in actuality, again, it only serves, again, on the half of the state, but then also it serves as a wet blanket to revolutionary and resistance. And so I just want to end by just saying for us to study the revolutions, especially in the global South, and to also to draw parallels, to not just keep it in, oh, that's the past, but understand that this is a continuation of a liberation process, of a revolutionary process. And I love how Leila says that, how, again, it's not, this didn't start in 1948, that is actually interconnected to all revolutionary struggles, because all revolutionary struggles, the common enemy is Western imperialism, white hegemony, and of course, oppression worldwide. And that our objectives as people who want to see a liberated world and liberated people and a self-determining people is the destruction and the fall of those systems. So any revolution that is fighting against that is our collective revolution. And we have to remember and understand that as they seek to divide us and to tell us that, no, your revolution struggle is not with the Palestinians, or the Black revolutionary struggle in Haiti is not connected to the Black Americans in America. No, those are lies. Because again, all of the liberation struggles are against the common enemy. And as long as we are all dealing blows to the common enemy, we are a part of each other's struggle. So I'll leave it there. I don't want to go on too long. But if anyone did want to engage in discussion, don't hesitate to grab a mic. But also don't feel pressured. It's okay to just chill and listen and to let it seep in and to process it, because it is a lot to process, especially since you understand that, or I would hope those in this space understand that you are a part of an ongoing revolutionary struggle. And what you do today, it leads to an ongoing struggle that you will lead to the people coming after us. So we do have responsibilities and we do have a destiny. Whether you take up that call is totally up to you, but there is a collective that's already engaged in this fight, and that all we have to do is stand up. And the only thing we have to lose is our chains. And that's what I learned from revolutionaries and reading revolutionary texts like this. So with that, of course, you already know I'm always hungry. So I'm about to go eat. But I want y'all to take care of each other and to look out for each other. And let's get free. And I say this out loud in affirmation that we will see revolution in our lifetime. Y'all take care.